Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 4 of season 3 of The Walking Dead called Walk With Me. Hey, isn't that a funny little parallel? Anyway, this is our big episode of really focusing in on what's been going on with Andrea and her companion, Michonne. Okay, you're going to have to forgive me. I'm kind of still struggling with how to say that name, because for the longest time I really was not sure how you say her name, and just because I studied it for so long and I lived in Japan for 3 years, whenever I kind of encounter a word I don't know, my brain sort of automatically jumps to Japanese linguistics. So I was pronouncing her name as Michone, and that's of course incorrect. So if I trip up with her name, please forgive me. I'm still kind of getting used to this. Anyway, here. We of course are totally focused in on Andrea and Michonne this time around, and I do like Michonne as a character in the comics. And to keep in mind, I have read pretty much all the comics, so I'm pretty familiar with her comic book counterpart. And I guess it's a little off-putting for me, seeing as how I feel that I know the character of Michonne pretty well already. Seeing her really put that distance between her and everybody around her, it's just like, come on, I really want you to get in there and get to the core of this really great character. And seriously, she is one of the strongest characters in the entire Walking Dead comic series. Of course, we're only 4 episodes in. We haven't really spent too much time with her, and she has very, very good reasons for keeping people at a distance. And really, about the only person, really, no, literally, there's no about. The only person in this world that she has any trust in is Andrea. And while she doesn't exactly say that to Andrea this episode, it is very heavily implied. So, as long as we're talking about her, let's continue on. Again, because I've read the comics, the whole thing with them realizing, that why she cut the walkers' mouths and arms off, okay, that's obvious. But the idea that they could mask her scent, it's something I've kind of just been absolutely itching for that to get out there since we first really got a look at her at the start of this season. Again, because I've read the comics, this is old news to me. But I'm sure that probably came as a surprise to some of the folks out there. But nonetheless, it is genuinely a very, very smart, very clever twist that Robert Kirkman, the writer who came up with Walking Dead, found. It really does make for, of course, a very powerful visual to see John walking around with those two walkers chained up like that. And as Milton, that's the name of the governor's science geek, points out, this shows that Michonne is a very, very smart lady. Now, of course, the big question that is raised this episode is who were those two walkers? And it is, despite her lack of statement on that, it's obvious that they are somebody that Michonne knew. Now, I'm not going to spoil who they were for you. Those of us who've read the comics, of course, know who they are already. I just want to say I'm looking forward to that particular reveal. It's really one of, I think, Michonne's best establishing character moments when you learn the identity of those two walkers. And it just really gives you some very nice insight into her personality and reminds you just really how Michonne is, she's totally hardcore. Now, let's move on and talk about the character who I guess might have probably been a very big surprise for some folks watching this time around. That is, of course, the return of Merle Dixon. People have been speculating and wondering whatever happened to Merle since very early on in Season 1. Well, here we get our answer. Of course, I avoid spoilers generally for the shows that I watch. I'm very stringent about that. But the return in terms of casting wise of Merle was, if you've really been following the show in any way, even if you're avoiding spoilers, you couldn't really help but hear about this. And come on, we all knew this was going to happen anyway. They certainly wouldn't have really brought him back for a cameo, albeit as a hallucination last season, if they weren't going to pick that thread up again someday. So, of course, Merle seems to have changed a little bit. As one reviewer out there pointed out, that Merle goes this entire episode without saying anything racist. And he doesn't seem to have any problem working alongside the Hispanic and black members of the governor's crew. So it's probably not unreasonable to think that Merle has taken Daryl's stance on things of, you know what, I don't care who, basically saying, I don't care about race anymore, I care much more about survival, which, would be, of course, in a zombie apocalypse, a pretty reasonable attitude to take. But again, it would also show that Merle has grown a little bit as a character, as a person. Now, I'm not trying to defend the fact that Merle is a racist in any way. Okay, that is, in the 21st century, a completely unacceptable attitude to have for any reason. But that said, I do like that they aren't making Merle just a flat character. He is not a guy who is totally defined by his trait of being a racist. And this was going on even back as far back as season 1. Merle was defined also by the fact that he might have been a bastard, but he genuinely cared a lot for his brother. And of course, when Merle was chained up on that roof, he literally stopped for a moment and basically pleaded for God to help him because he didn't want to die in that fashion. And as horrible a person as Merle had been up to that point, even his harshest critics, going by what the reaction I saw online, really couldn't help but feel sorry for the guy. That, him having the choice of basically starving to death on a rooftop or get devoured by zombies, I mean, nobody really deserves to go out like that. And anyway, as I said, it looks as if Merle has probably outgrown that particular character trait, if for no other reason than survival. We'll see how it goes. Of course, we've also seen that Merle has not quite forgotten about what Rick's group did to him back in Atlanta, and still holding a bit of a grudge over that. Then again, they did leave him chained up on a roof of a building to die of starvation, dehydration, or being devoured by zombies. So, yeah, kind of hard not to figure that Merle would still be a little upset by that. And of course, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. Merle has his little bionic hand there. I know it's meant to be, as best I can tell, a bayonet that he's got on there. But to me, I was actually reminded of a guitar knife. If there's it's a type of push knife, sometimes also called a katara, no relation to the character from Avatar: The Last Airbender, that originates in India. They're sometimes also called punching daggers, I believe. And yeah, they're pretty badass things. I've seen demonstrations of them on TV, and those can really mess a body up. And Merle proves that he's adapted to his disability, shall we say, quite well when he just casually kills that walker that comes up on him when he gets the drop on Andrea and John. Now, I gotta say here, that scene with them having that little conversation, Merle just absolutely steals that scene. And of course, we got a really good actor here. His return is something that fans have been wanting to see for a long time. And there's just so much creepy, scary tension going there. We really don't know what to expect from Merle in that situation. And seeing Merle basically playing it cool, honestly, that's more unsettling than him having some crazy violent reaction. That would we expect from the Merle that we used to know. But this new Merle, he's a bit of a wild card. Now let's see here. Before I move on, I want to talk about the scene at the helicopter crash for a moment. Okay, is it just me, or is anyone else really sort of bothered by the fact that these really tiny, crappy bushes were able to do such a great job of concealing 2 live people and 2 walkers from guys who looked like they were, maybe 50 feet away? Probably not even that. I mean, literally, there's a scene where you can see over Andrea's shoulder just before Merle gets the drop on him, to the guy who's walking around with the assault rifle looking for walkers. And Andrea is just so blatantly, obviously exposed. This guy must be half blind not to be able to see her from that distance away. It's actually kind of ridiculous. But, you know, this is just one of those things in television that you sort of have to go with. Now, of course, we are introduced to another major character from the comics here. We are introduced, of course, to the Governor. And as is demonstrated by the end of this episode, he is indeed a villain. He is arguably the most evil person we ever meet in the Walking Dead comics. And I was just sort of doing a little research just before I made this to sort of brush up on my Walking Dead lore. Some years back, the website IGN.com actually voted the Governor the 87th greatest villain in comic book history. And while 87 is not the highest number on a 1 to 100 scale, if you stack that up against all the other villains that have appeared in comics since comic books really started to take off in America in the late 1930s, that's actually a pretty impressive accomplishment. And again, just to, I don't want to spoil anything for folks who haven't read the comics, but oh my god, some of the stuff the Governor does to the characters in the comics is just, I mean, The Walking Dead is a horror series, sure, but it's the horror series generally in the sense of, oh my god, there are zombies everywhere. Some of the things the Governor does are just horrifying on that real world level of things that we know human beings do in real life. You know, man's inhumanity to man, which in a world where, you know, there's dead people walking around chowing down on the living, and you would think that people would band together and want to show some humanity just to keep the human race going. Okay, well, anyway, the Governor in the comics is just an insanely bad dude. So, just how much of what he does in the comics are we going to get to see here in the TV series? Well, I will tell you that in the comics he did have his room full of aquariums with zombie heads as well. And you know what? I'm going to throw out a tiny spoiler here, just to sort of illustrate what we're talking about. Here on the show, the Governor sits there with his drink looking at the heads, including the head of the helicopter pilot, who you'll notice doesn't seem to have turned into a zombie, indicating he was killed, you know, probably just without ever becoming a zombie. The Governor probably just got the information he needed from him and then just the guy. But in the comics, when he's sitting there looking at the big old wall of zombie heads, in the TV show the Governor doesn't say anything. He just sits there quietly with his drink. In the comics, he actually says something along the lines of, you know, there's 100 channels and nothing's on. Which, you know, sounds comedic, but the way it's presented in the comics just really sends a chill down your spine. It really shows you that this guy is just completely over the edge. Now, again, is he going to be as bad as in the comics? Honestly, I kind of hope not, because, you know, as dark as this show is, I really don't think I wanted to go quite as dark as they do in the comics. Let me put it to you that way. I genuinely walked away from some of the things the Governor did in the comics feeling slightly dirty. It's just like, oh my god, that was so horrible. But I'm obviously becoming a little repetitive on that note, so let's move on. Now, I did like that the Governor referred to the folks at Woodbury as seeds. Sort of a very clever allusion to the title of the first episode of this season. And the way he talked about the human race rising again. I was honestly a little surprised he literally did not invoke the metaphor of a phoenix. But then again, given the Governor's methods, maybe what he wants to rise is not like a phoenix, but despite what he says, more like walkers. Because, as we've seen through the governor's own actions, he's not above feeding on the living either. Now, let me see here. Yes, okay. The governor is, of course, played by a British actor by the name of David Morrissey. Guy's got a pretty nice reputation, but he's not someone who is really, as best I can tell, terribly familiar to American audiences. The role most of us folks from the States would probably know him as is as the Other Doctor in the episode from the David Tennant Doctor Who run called The Other Doctor, where he played a fella who thought he was a Time Lord called the Doctor. And again, I don't want to really go too much into that episode or what happened there. The people who know Doctor Who know I am sure, know what it is I'm talking about. People who aren't familiar with Doctor Who, hey, go check out the modern Doctor Who. It's actually quite cool. And that the Other Doctor is in fact a very, very good David Tennant episode. So yeah, we're definitely seeing this really nice trend of seeing a lot of Doctor Who actors popping up on American TV, and no doubt about it, David Morrissey is really doing a very, very good job here. His character as the governor is, of course, from what we've seen so far, fairly different than what he was in the comics. But again, I'm okay with that. One, I really wouldn't mind if they toned the governor down because, as I said, he's an extraordinarily evil, extraordinarily dark character, and as brutal as this show is, I don't think that they're willing to go quite that far, and honestly, I don't think I really want the show to go that dark. Now, a lot of folks, of course, are going to have questions about, who the governor is, what his deal is, what's his real name, is Andrea interested in him romantically? Well, that last question I have a feeling we'll get the answer to as the season rolls on. Although if that is true, boy, Andrea has really, really crummy taste in guys. I mean, as try as we might, I'm sure we haven't all forgotten what she had going on with Shane last season. Boy, really, really makes me wish that she'd just gotten together with Dale like she did in the comics. Hey, come on. If you haven't heard about that by now, you probably just haven't been paying attention. But anyway, there was actually a book put out, written by Robert Kirkman, again, the creator of Walking Dead, that, in fact, it was called The Rise of the Governor, which goes into great detail about the governor, who he was before the zombie apocalypse, and what happened to him immediately after things started going to hell. In fact, there's just recently there was a second book called The Road to Woodbury, which came out, and also by Robert Kirkman, and further elaborated on how the governor came to take over the town of Woodbury. I've just sort of read the synopsises of these online. I haven't actually read the books, but if it's written by the guy who created the show, I think you can be fairly sure it's probably a pretty decent story. And just from the synopsis I've read, the governor's origin does seem to be reasonably different than it was in the comics. I honestly have no real opinion about that one way or the other. I'm perfectly okay with them having the governor be quite a bit different than he was in the comics, for the reasons I've previously stated, and just for the fact that a character like the governor is a very interesting, very sort of nuanced person who is very much suitable for alternate interpretation. And with that said, folks, I think I've said everything that I have to say about this episode. Again, this is a really, really good episode of the season. There's a lot of stuff packed in. There's a lot of drama. A lot of stuff is set up. And we're one step further along towards what I'm thinking is going to be some just absolutely explosive stuff as the season wears on. I mean, I at this point, I don't even want to think about how insane the season finale for season 3 is probably going to be. It's just going to be crazy. I'm positive of it. And I'm totally looking forward to it. As I've said, after a really lackluster second season, this season has just really been firing on all cylinders. It's great. I'm loving it. The show, as I have said, is back. It is definitely must-see TV. And with that said, folks, I'm going to wrap it up. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.